What do you do when your pursuit of God leads to frustration and failure? That's what we're going to have to wrestle with as pursuers of God. And that's a question that Moses had to deal with and he had to learn the answer to. And that's what we find as we continue his story. Now, where we left off in Exodus chapter 4, Moses had been commissioned by God in spite of Moses' objections. And now at the end of chapter 4, Moses returns as a hero. He goes back to Egypt, he goes back to the Israelites, and he's going to tell them, he meets with the leaders, and he's going to tell them, God has chosen me to lead you out of Egypt. And to convince them, he's going to show them those miraculous signs that God gave him. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron. When they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. This is a great moment for Moses because Moses and his brother, they've been accepted by the Israelites. The Israelites believe that Moses has come from God. They believe that deliverance has come, and now all the loneliness, the shame, everything that Moses experienced for years in the desert, that's all in the past. And now I think Moses probably thought, all right, it's going to be success from here on out. This is a high moment in his pursuit of God. And you know, we have that too. We have moments where things just seem to make sense, where we just make wonderful progress in our pursuit of God. Maybe it's the first time that you open the Bible and you read it for yourself and you begin to really understand God's truth on your own. Or maybe it's the first time you get connected to a small group, to a mentor at church, and you begin to have real connection and real relationship that's authentic. Certainly, it's the moment that you put your faith in Jesus and trust in him for the forgiveness of your sins. In that moment, you just experience this wonderful connection with God. And in those moments, it feels like your pursuit of God will forever go on an upward trajectory. And then faith hits a brick wall. And that's what happened for Moses. And he had to learn a lesson that we have to learn too. Failure is common for the Christian. You see, just as Moses gets to this high point, he doesn't probably realize it, but he's actually kind of set up for a pretty bitter failure. You see, Moses and Aaron, they do what God says. They go before Pharaoh, and they go up to Pharaoh, and they say, "Let my people go." Now, Pharaoh is the king of Egypt, perhaps the most powerful person in the world. And Pharaoh looks at this slave, and he says, "Who are you guys? Who's the God of Israel?" In fact, let's look at what he says. "Is that so?" reported Pharaoh. "And who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." You see, Pharaoh has got no time for this Moses nonsense, and he's like, "I'm not going to let you guys go. You're our slaves. You're building our pyramids." I don't know if they really built the pyramids, but you get the point. And so Pharaoh's like, "No, I'm not going to let you go." And in fact, he interprets this request to be a sign that the Israelites are lazy. They've got a lot of free time on their hands. And so he tells the foreman in charge of the slaves, he says, "No longer bring straw for the Israelites to make bricks. Make them get their own straw, but keep the same quota of bricks that they have to make." So in other words, the Israelite slaves, their work increased, but they weren't given any concessions or anything like that. And so when the Israelites hear about this, what do? They turn on Moses. The foreman said to them, "May the Lord judge and punish you for making us stink before Pharaoh and his officials. You have put a sword into their hands, an excuse to kill us." This was Moses' first failure, first setback after coming back from the desert. And apparently it caught Moses off guard. I guess he thought he was just going to walk out of Egypt with all the people like it was no big deal. But he had to learn that faith hits a brick wall. And the same thing is true for us. You know, maybe you have moments where you are just so excited about God. Maybe it was the moment you became a Christian or not too long after that, and you went to your family, you went to your friends to tell them about Jesus, that they would believe in him, that they would find what you found, and you excitedly and passionately shared Jesus with them, and they were like, "Dude, you're crazy," or they ignored you. Or maybe you feel that God has put some burden on you to start a small group or to reach out in your community in some way, and you've tried to make that work, and it just isn't working. It's just leading to disappointment, frustration. Your faith has hit a brick wall. And those can be hard times. And what often happens with failure is that failure can lead to disappointment with God. This is what happens to Moses. Moses is deeply disappointed, and he's not just disappointed in the Israelites, he's pretty disappointed with God. Then Moses went back to the Lord and protested, "Why have you brought all this trouble on your own people, Lord? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesman, he has been ever more brutal to your people, and you have done nothing to rescue them." Now, Moses blames God for the situation, even though God said, "Moses, it's going to take some effort here. Pharaoh's not going to let you go right away." God had already said that, but Moses wasn't listening, I guess, and so he's really disappointed. But notice God's response. God doesn't strike Moses with a lightning bolt. God is very patient with Moses, and he's compassionate toward Moses. And this teaches us that, we can be disappointed with God, and God's not going to, be done with us. We can be honest with our feelings, honest with our emotions to God. Now, that doesn't mean that we can be disrespectful to God. That doesn't mean that we can sort of just shake our fists at God, and it certainly doesn't mean that we should walk away from him. But when we have honest struggles, real problems, we can bring those to God, and God understands. And God responds to us just as he responded to Moses. We ultimately trust God because of his character. How does God respond to us in the midst of our frustrations and our disappointments and our failures? How does God respond to us when we say, "God, why did you allow this to happen?" Well, he asks us to trust in him, to trust in his character. I'd encourage you to read Exodus chapter 6. 5 times God says to Moses, "I am." He says, "Moses, this is who I am. Even though circumstances look bad, even though Pharaoh looks strong, trust me." That's what God says to us. Trust him. Trust his character. Trust who he is. And then after the 5 times he says, "I am," 8 times he says, "I will." He says, "Moses, I will do this. I will save my people. I will rescue my people." And God says to you, "I will be with you. I am on your side. I have not neglected you." And so your faith, it's going to hit a brick wall, probably a few brick walls. And what's your response every time as you process the disappointment, as you process the failure? Your response is to learn to say, "God, I trust in you, and I trust in what you're going to do in my life."